So hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Claire Payne. I am the web librarian and the liaison to the art department at Stony Brook University Libraries. And I am so excited to welcome all of you to the second lecture of the Fall 2021 Art in Focus series, where we are joined by Dr. Ellen Landau for a lecture on Lee Krasner, Hans Hofmann, and the role of drawing in modernism. This Art in Focus series is co-presented by the SBU Libraries and the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center. And we would like to extend our thanks to the Herman Goldman Foundation and Stony Brook's John H. Marburger III Fund for supporting the series. And in the before times, we did host these lectures at the SBU Southampton Campus Library. We've really enjoyed seeing so many folks from all over the world via this virtual method in the last 18 months. So no matter where you're tuning in from today, thank you for being here. Just a couple of logistics. We'll open with the lecture and then we'll have plenty of time for audience Q&A at the end. But until that, we will keep everyone on mute. But you're welcome to ask questions via chat anytime or by raising your hand at the end of the lecture, and we'll get to those then. So I'd now like to welcome Helen Harrison, the Eugene V. and Claire E. Thaw Director of the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center and co-coordinator of this series, to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everyone. I apologize for being invisible or being static. I guess my camera doesn't seem to be working, so you will just be hearing me behind the scenes. But I'm very, very happy to welcome Ellen Landau back as a speaker. She has been with us many times before. In fact, she actually predates me at the Pollock Krasner House when she was doing her research for the Lee Krasner Catalogue Raisonné back in 1989. So I will give you a little background about Ellen and then turn over the program to her. She is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor Emerita in the Humanities at Case Western Reserve University, and now an independent art historian and curator in California. She's a recognized expert on abstract expressionism with a subspecialty in 20th century women artists and artistic couples. In 1989, she co-organized a Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner joint retrospective at the Kunstmuseum Bern in Switzerland, and has been involved since then in a number of US and international exhibitions featuring each artist. She is the author of Reading Abstract Expressionism, a 2005 book examining essays and criticism of the movement, a 2013 study of Mexico's impact on 4 key practitioners, including Pollock, and an earlier major monograph on Pollock, which was published in 1989 and is still in print. Ellen also edited Lee Krasner, a Catalogue Raisonné, which came out in 1995. She has written specifically as well on Hans Hofmann and widely on other pioneer abstract expressionists. Following her recent essay introduced at Kasmin Gallery's 2021 Art Basel exhibition of Lee Krasner's Charcoals, on which today's talk is based, and exhibition catalogs on the rediscovered work of Michael Corinne West for 2 Hollis Taggart Gallery exhibitions in 2019 and 2021, her current project, along with Joan Martyr, who's with us today, involves taking a broader look at the female painters and sculptors of abstract expressionism, represented in the collection of Christian and Florence Levitt, which was the subject of one of this summer's Liechtenstein lectures. So now I am happy to introduce Ellen Landau.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Helen. I'm really glad to be back, see so many new faces, see a bunch of old faces, old friends, etc. By way of introduction, I want to mention that it was a little bit of history repeating itself that became the impetus for a brand new look at Lee Krasner's charcoal drawings, the ones that she did at the Hofmann House. Beginning in 1990, when my then assistant Jeff Grove and I started collecting information on Krasner's oeuvres to be included in the Catalogue Raisonné, we were working in the dark ages, so to speak, compared to what people are doing today in today's world with Catalogues Raisonné, because we had no ability to search online for existing examples. We had no software programs to make it easy to compile information, and no way to sort of add and subtract as the as the project progressed. We were working from information that we got from letters to family, letters to dealers, letters to museums, and works that were still in the ownership of the Pollock Krasner Foundation that Robert Miller Gallery was the custodian of, okay? So at the time, I went to Robert Miller Gallery, they showed me what was in the gallery stock, and I came up with, with entries, and we ended up with 54 nude charcoal drawings and 4 charcoal drawings that were still lifes. And I will explain to you during the lecture why there's such a big discrepancy between the possibilities of the two of them. And while certainly more examples have come to light in the over 3 decades, since we started working on that, it's been individual things here and there, okay, until recently. It certainly has been known since Krasner's 1977 exhibition at Pace Gallery of huge collage paintings that incorporated torn and slivered and cut pieces of these drawings, that the way in which that came about is that Brian Robertson, who was the curator / director of the Whitechapel Gallery in London, was visiting and started poking around in her studio while she was working on something else. And apparently he came across, and it must have been multiple portfolios of these drawings, and said, "What are these?" And she kind of had forgotten about them. She either just didn't remember that she still had them, or figured that that was like ancient history and not something that she needed to keep front and center. So that was sort of like a serendipitous discovery. And in a way, what led to rethinking these works in the past couple of years is another serendipitous discovery, because when the Robert Miller Gallery closed and the estate of Krasner was moved to Kasmin, they discovered that there was one, and it's possibly 2, I'm not sure if they were all in one portfolio, of drawings that had never been shown to me when I was working on the Catalogue Raisonné. They didn't have Robert Miller inventory numbers, and it somehow or other, they just, slipped through the cracks. So as a result, we started out with, I'm trying to remember now, 50 some drawings that are in the Catalogue Raisonné of nudes and 4 still lifes. And within the last 3 years, there's 16 more drawings of the nude and 4 more still lifes. So the still lifes kind of doubled as a result of finding these. And there were some other individual smaller paintings and whatever it is that were stored along with that. In any case, it's kind of like, let's discover some portfolios and then let's discover them again. And that's kind of how this all came about. And Kasmin asked me to do a complete kind of rethinking, now that we have new examples. And by the way, I understand that many of these new examples have found new European homes because it was a very popular booth at at Art Basel. It was supposed to open at Art Basel 2020, but of course we all know, kind of what happened to make that idea not really viable. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you kind of a short version of the lot longer essay that I wrote to accompany these works, and the book, the catalog that was published by Kasmin to accompany the new pictures is now for sale. So if you have an interest in seeing the longer version and seeing more examples, you could go on Kasmin's website, and they would, and you could, push the button that says, I want to buy this. All right, so Helen, I think I am ready to start. That gives, kind of a little teaser for what this whole thing is about. And I'm going to be very happy to take any questions or answer any issues that you think might be of interest to you after you hear the talk. Helen? Yeah.
Yes, I'm sharing the screen now.
Okay, cool.
I had to unmute myself, but there we go.
Okay, so we'll start with the first slide. Okay. Much has been written about the significance of Hans Hofmann's role as the so-called pedagogical master of abstract expressionism. Born in Bavaria in 1880, Hofmann lived and worked in Paris from 1904 to 14, then opened his own school in Munich, relocating to the United States in 1932. It's widely agreed that his role in wartime and post-war New York should be considered a crucial component to New York's future preeminence as the global capital of artistic innovation. Hofmann was the only teacher able to impart directly to eager young Americans in the 1940s and 50s, 30s as well, major tenets of the avant-garde European styles that he himself had experienced during modernism's early phase. By 1937, virtually the entire front line of American abstract artists had been enrolled or were currently attending his New York downtown classes. That year, Lee Krasner, a young and zealously ambitious painter from Brooklyn, joined the Hofmann cohort. Under his tutelage, drawing the figure, a seemingly traditional activity, was to play an unquestionably radical role. Hans Hofmann's core principles comprised a synthesis of French ideas on form and color from Cézanne, Matisse, Delaunay, and Picasso, with mystically inclined Germanic notions of empathy and spirituality based on the writings of Kandinsky. His major precepts included the pursuit of plasticity through warm-cool opposition, and I'm showing you some paintings by him where that's taking place. And this was a method of color contrast that he called push-pull. Also, the goal of pictorial life, which he considered a precondition for creativity. Push-pull was conceived as a formula to control the surface in a two-dimensional way, while simultaneously producing an effect of controlled depth. That for Hofmann, plasticity involved the active transference of three-dimensional experience to a flat picture plane became a concept highly significant for Krasner's education. Hofmann's students were taught above all to feel and depict space not as static inner emptiness. Rather, it should be presented vigorously, synthesizing force and counterforce with volume and movement. A young artist, and here are two examples by friends of Krasner's that were there at the same time, George McNeil and Lillian Orlowski. A young artist must learn to manifest positive and negative planes and volumes in pictorial tension. In other words, push-pull can work in black and white as well as in color. While he placed greater value on the on the act of creating than on artwork's final appearance, Hofmann offered conventionally posed models for charcoal drawing in the morning and evening and set up still lifes, both charcoal and paint allowed, for use in the afternoon. That's probably why there are many fewer still lifes left in Krasner's portfolios, because for the most part, as you saw in the picture of her in the studio, she was painting in the afternoon and not making still life drawings. But in the morning, that's all she could do. No matter what or how potential objects were presented, Hofmann believed experiencing spatiality should constitute every artwork's central essence. Many times in later interviews, Lee Krasner would characterize her initial art instruction at Cooper Union and the National Academy of Design during the period 1926 to 32 as having been totally uncongenial to her independent temperament and natural inclinations. However, as she recalled, upon entering Hofmann's classes, for the first time, I felt a personal ease and an encouraging response from a teacher. Decades later, Hofmann's registrar in 1937, Lillian O. Lindsay Kiesler, remembered vividly Krasner's stunning appearance the day she arrived to seek admission. Now, this is a little bit later. This is a 1940 photograph, but I think you get the idea. This unusual woman, dressed in bohemian garb, radiated a unique magnetism, an energy and sparkle, obviously mixed, however, with anger and arrogance. You can see a little of the latter here. Lindsay was not surprised when Krasner presented a portfolio of drawings characterized by powerful chiaroscuro contrasts. And she ran to suggest that Hofmann take a look immediately. Regarding the portfolio, when Hofmann heard she had studied at the Academy, he remarked, "Don't bother." but he agreed to admit her anyway. Others there at the same time recollected Krasner as never being considered a beginner, either by their teacher or her fellow classmates. Hofmann took her seriously and treated her as a professional from the start, although he did once, unfortunately, and now quite famously, state that a drawing she just made was so good, you'd never know it was done by a woman. Comparing what Krasner had been creating on the left with what she would accomplish under Hofmann underscores how fundamental his system for accrediting modern art became for her development. Probable that the drawings she brought for admission, the ones that you've just been looking at, had been created during 1933 evening classes at the Settlement House in Greenwich Village. There she was exposed by instructor Joe Goodman to the tactile hollow and bump method of Thomas Hart Benton, also her future husband, Jackson Pollock's teacher. Comparing Krasner's mature Hofmann era drawings, such as the 1940 example on the right, to extant Conti crayon sketches and charcoal sketches, as you see here, of a muscular standing female, the one you saw last time, and a seated nude, the one that's repeated here, signals the thorough and uncompromising nature and extent of Krasner's decisive break, beginning 4 years later with past goals and abilities, because she started there around 1937. An awkwardly articulated and positioned Hofmann era example, known only from a recently discovered photo in the latter's archive, I was poking through it looking for something else, with the reverse signed in her handwriting, Lenore Krasner, K-R-A-S-S-N-E-R, which was her name at that time, and we'll come back to that. This likely presents a preliminary attempt with him. As she progressed, Krasner's most advanced figural sketches, like the one we just saw, done during the essential years she was practicing at the Hofmann School, demonstrate her decisive realization that Hofmann's recommended approach to drawing had little or nothing to do with the fundamentals of draftsmanship or design she had previously been taught. Advising that the outlines of the support be considered the first lines of any composition, actually the beginning and the finale of the pictorial message, Hofmann advocated the pursuit of rhythm. You don't see it so much here. This is a little bit not sophisticated. He defined rhythm as movement measured in time and space. Hofmann was particularly enterprising in ways he set up the model and in assembling components of a still life left standing for 3 months duration. You saw him with that still life a little bit before. One of his students famously remembered that if he didn't have any objects for the still life, he would take a piece of paper, crumple it, throw it at the window and say, "This is your still life." So he was very avant-garde, I suppose, in that sense. Emphasis on a vibrant studio milieu played into Hofmann's conviction that expressing the arrangement in space of the human body or other objects to be drawn was far more important than veristic accuracy. He was against distraction by trivialities, including anatomy, which Krasner had previously been trained should constitute the foundation of figural drawing. Focus must instead be placed on the dynamic power which controls the body. Learning to strip perception to its most basic level would enable a prospective painter eventually to think and work more abstractly in front of a canvas, Hofmann believed. From the back of the classroom, Hofmann himself often worked in front of the same model as his evening students, although he did not allow them to see what he was doing. His own mid-30s and early 40s works on paper, as you see on the left, fluent figure drawings executed in India ink, typically demonstrate a continuous arabesque indebted to Matisse, whose work Hofmann revered. Hofmann and Krasner, who sometimes came to draw at night, could have been expressing their own views of the same or a similarly positioned, perhaps male model, in the two examples on the screen. Although interestingly, none of Krasner's extant nudes, unlike many of her fellow students, obviously depict a masculine subject. While neither Krasner nor Hofmann here aimed for visual authenticity in capturing what may have been a seated position, his rendering demonstrates a more continuous stroke, emphasized with both widely and more densely spaced scribbled parallel or crosshatched background lines. By contrast, Krasner's version marked 1938, which, and here's the rub about the dates, may or may not be correct since she signed and backdated most of these drawings in the 1970s, harks more to the impact of Picasso than it does Matisse. She had particularly admired a 1910 stripped down new drawing by Picasso on view at the Met. And that's the work that you see on the left. By the way, had been donated to the Met by Stieglitz. In classroom critiques, Krasner later related, Hofmann would frequently swing like a pendulum between highlighting the two, Matisse and Picasso. In this case, since she also emphasized vectors or lines of force emanating from the figure, her approach even borders on what might be called the cubo-futuristic, by also seeming to incorporate characteristics such as lines of force associated with analytic cubism's more aggressive Italian variant. Numerous other examples, including some works that had been stored for decades in an overlooked portfolio. And what I'm doing is I'm showing you now some of the ones that were on view at Art Basel. These of course are exposed to the public and collectors for the very first time, reveal without question how the level of her understanding of the alternatives possible in depicting modernist space quickly progressed beyond that crude example whose photo is included in Hofmann's archive. In her most advanced of these, Krasner, even more energetically than her teacher and pretty definitely more sophisticated than most of her fellow students, defined the competing tensions generated by the model's pose set within and against its surrounding space. In other words, you're not even really seeing the model, you're seeing the tensions of the model's pose in whatever surrounding he set it. Hofmann's precept that every exercise, no matter how abstract or expressionistic its eventual final state, must at least be grounded initially in what was in front of you, very soon became a rigidity Krasner would rigorously reject. Irrespective of his own inclinations toward life model rendering, from what student evidence survives, and Krasner's now roughly 70 known examples, counting the 16 new ones, do constitute likely the largest single compendium. There was a big show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the 70s or early 80s, I think, that was organized by Cynthia Goodman that had examples of different people's works, but it does not appear as though any other artist has that large number of existing drawings from that period. Hofmann encouraged those working with him to run a larger gamut stylistically, so long as they obeyed certain fundamental hard and fast rules. So the ones that we just saw were quite abstract. The one on the left here is almost realistic, and the one on the right is very expressionistically drawn. The certain fundamental hard and fast rules included the head should always try to touch the top of the paper. She does it in one of the cases, not so much in the other. And the entire composition must be worked on simultaneously. In other words, you can't start with the head, do the shoulders, then go down to the breast, then go down to the entire work the entire image should be worked on all at the same time. This range, as I've now shown you, can be seen in the current Kasmin showing, the showing of some of the newly found works, can certainly be cataloged within Krasner's extant examples alone, not just the ones recently found, but ones that are already in the Catalogue Raisonné, stretching from the semi-representational or heavily volumetric and expressively distorted, as you see here, to the more plainer, oscillating, semi-transparent compositions, others, as we've just seen, virtually unrecognizable as referencing a body. A similar, albeit more limited trajectory is detectable in the 8 charcoal still lifes extant in Krasner's oeuvre, half of which, as I pointed out, are recent finds. So the recent find on the left is a lot more realistic than the almost Picassoid, or looks like more like Brock, perhaps, 1938 work that is owned by Yale University Art Gallery. Additional evidence of Hofmann's influence can be gleaned from Krasner's in situ Hofmann School photo that I showed you in the beginning. Here she is at work on a Picasso and Mondrian influenced abstract still life around 1940. Behind her, tacked up high on the wall, however, a group of charcoal nudes, likely done by multiple students, is partially visible. Such classroom wall displays, comprised assorted drawings chosen for Hofmann's famous Tuesday and Friday open critiques. During these, perhaps due to his partial deafness and English language deficits, Hofmann often made emendations directly on a student's drawing. And here you can see some examples by her very close friend at that time, Mercedes Carls, but now subsequently became Mercedes Matter. He would insert arrows and such like over specific areas to indicate spatial revision. And sometimes, as on the left, he would add small diagrams in the margins of a composition indicating alternate ways to increase its dynamic quality. A hands-on method of correcting documented also in numerous surviving works, not by a substantial cross-section of former attendees like Mercedes Matter, and at least 2 drawings by Krasner. These 2 can be identified as incorporating Hofmann's physical advice. One of them, the one on the right that's in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, was Krasner donated to the Met as a result of that exhibition. I think everybody that was in that exhibition, every student donated 1 work to the Met. So we're 100% sure that that one has his corrections, but the one on the left, which is at the moment, certainly looks like it has Hofmann corrections as well. Even more controversially than drawing, little diagrams and arrows and so forth, Hofmann might alternatively, in front of the entire class, tear or slice off parts of a student's drawing, then reassemble the pieces, the sections, using thumbtacks or tape. He likewise devised this more critical procedure to enlarge the emphasis on spatial relations from individual elements forming a model's body to encompass the picture's entire expanse. While many considered these methods a brilliant learning experience, others, definitely including Lee Krasner, were appalled when they first saw him do it. Okay, although while at his school, she had somewhat vociferously objected to Hofmann's use of such collage-based tactics for correcting student sketches, it's extremely interesting how at several highly important stages during the roughly 4 decades left of her career, Lee Krasner would find herself harking back to those same procedures as a way to enact a comparable process, this time of self-reestimation. In one frankly emotional instance during a low period in her marriage from 1953 to 55, Krasner chose, and interestingly with Pollock's apparent cooperation, as you see him standing here holding one of those works, it's actually a vertical work, she chose to combine discarded shards from Pollock's 1950 stained black poured figurative canvases, as well as smaller pieces torn, sheared, or severed from abstract marks he had made in ink and enamel on absorbent paper, interjecting them into a series of her own painted and pasted compositions. She's standing in front of one of those here, and right above her head, that sort of watermelon-shaped form. And certainly on the right-hand side, in a work kind of perhaps titled Bald Eagle in reference to Pollock, but who knows, you can see also obvious little pieces of Pollock's own drawings. Doing this seemingly provided Krasner a more neutral way to resolve her interpersonal problems, not being able to be close to her husband. In reality, the pieces of their work together allowed her to work out on an aesthetic plane the closeness that she otherwise missed. Based on the success of her immediately following and wholly original collages, and when I say original, they didn't incorporate any parts of Pollock, that were exhibited at the Stable Gallery in 1955, borrowing from both Hofmann and Pollock, albeit in dissimilar ways, aided Krasner in moving more seamlessly across a new threshold to a major transition. Lee Krasner always maintained that she considered Jackson Pollock's introduction into her life in late 1941 as precipitating as radical a break with Hofmann as Hofmann and Cubism had engendered earlier in regard to the Academy. Toward the end of her life, in another way impossible to foresee, and I've already given you a foretaste of this, the differing effects of each influential artist were destined to interact in her work again, and to triangulate specifically with her 1937 to 40 Radical Education in the Advancement of Modernist Drawing. Surprising no one so much as herself, the huge, astonishingly ambitious and authoritative collage paintings that constituted her first Pace Gallery solo exhibition held in 1977 turned out to demonstrate with an even fiercer inventiveness the overlap in value of Pollock's improvisational method with her more deliberate education under Hofmann. Grouped in a series, she named 11 ways to use the words to see, present conditional here as an example. Each was titled for a different verb tense, borrowing from a linguistic system suggesting time and its consequences, or time and its conditions. These commanding and formidable works, they're very large, would not only cap, but thoroughly revitalize Krasner's career and invigorate her reputation. Repurposing many more of those long forgotten Hofmann era charcoals, the ones that were refound by the British curator poking around in her studio, and adding as well their ghost-like reverse impressions, you can see a little bit of that here, provided for Krasner, as she said, clues to my former work methods and social style. I should explain that the ghost-like impressions came about because these works were kind of nested into the portfolio with no intervening, well, maybe sometimes many with no intervening paper that would keep one from rubbing off on the other, so that the back of a work often had sort of these, what we might call ghost impressions of the front of the work that was right next to it. Anyway, at age 68, sort of finding these works with Brian Robertson set her to thinking more about what she called time and its inexorable passage. Was I any different then from what I am now? The old drawings in the portfolios brought this home to me even more poignantly, she would explain. Krasner deliberately named the first collage of the new series, the one that you're seeing here, imperative, meaning I experienced the need not just to examine these drawings, but a peremptory desire to change them, a command, as it were, to make them new. She obeyed the self-directives by taking compositions originally based stylistically on the example of Picasso, as we saw with that example from the Stieglitz collection at the Met, and then cutting and organizing them in the manner of late Matisse, of course, who was very famous for the sensational cutouts that he did when he was too old to actually paint. Merging schematic and expressionistic 1937 to 40 figural compositions into newly fragmented abstract patterns, as you see here, where vigorously positioned angles provide a lively counterpoint to sections exposing the curvaceous female body, Krasner scissored and spliced these with their accidentally smudged or spectral negative images, which she sometimes pasted face down, along with other slivered shards, sections of raw canvas, and occasionally larger areas of freshly applied hue. The latter type, and you can see a little bit of it in imperative, reflects yet another Hofmann corrective technique that she previously rejected. This involved taping or pasting small pieces of colored paper onto student compositions, and remember the compositions are black and white, a different method to guide their reworking. In a few examples, including present subjunctive that was on view in Basel, an imperfect indicative, which we'll see in a minute, a square-shaped work, Krasner preserved a number of more intact Hofmann-era drawings. This type, she later observed, is replete with the past. You can see quite clearly much of how I worked in the early days as it really looked then. Many decades after she had left his school and gone through a variety of mature artistic phases, Krasner, it seems, would finally bring to fruition Hofmann's most important lessons about what he called plastic organization and the need to reconcile depth and compression on a flat picture plane. Further perfecting his injunction to examine intervals and positions in space, solid, void, thrust, and counterthrust, she also reprised with greater individuality and deeper understanding an essential set of issues and strategies associated with Pollock's impact. Most particularly, she put her own spin on his automatist resolution of fundamental oppositions, such as chance and control, disorder and order, free and predetermined form. Krasner accomplished this through a brilliant process of dialectical play, transforming her own early figure drawings into gestures that amplify a bold and novel grammar of vision. Modernist drawing, Krasner ably demonstrates, can become so much more than simply a way station to some other position. Thank you. Okay, now if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them, or if you have comments, I'm happy to hear them.
If anyone would like to put their questions into the chat, that would be fine. Otherwise, we can, let me just end the slideshow and you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. I have a question, Ellen.
Sure.
You mentioned about the still lifes.
Right.
And the fact that she only had at least 2 drawings that we know of that reflect the still life, but there are many paintings of the still lifes from the Hofmann period.
Yes, there are.
You think it was something to do with the technique of figure drawing that's maybe more immediate, more dynamic? Still life is very static, so you would have to study it in a different way.
Right. Well, there were the 4 drawings that I did get shown, or that I knew existed, like, you know, the one at Yale or whatever it is, and then 4 more. Interestingly, in the 4 more that were just discovered, none of them were as dynamic as the figure paintings. I'm my guess. All right, so I mentioned that she redated and signed the works much later, and this was confirmed to me by her secretary, Darby Kardonsky. Why did I, and I'm going to get back to your question, this is sort of a lead into it. Why was I suspicious about those signatures? Because a lot of these drawings are signed Lee Krasner, and that was not her name at the time. That was not the name that she was using. She was still Lenore and Krasner with 2 S's.
Or
Okay.
LK, I guess she also.
I was just going to say the only other option that she did was LK. So the ones that are not signed LK, but are signed Lee Krasner, we also have to wonder about the dates, because she, according to Darby, she kind of arbitrarily said, okay, this one I did in 38, this one I did in 40, this one I did in 37, 39, you know, blah, blah, blah. So we can't really, in either the still lifes or the still life or the figure drawings, we can't really see a progression. The most typical progression that you would think would be from realistic to abstract, because that mirrors the progression in the rest of her career. Okay, and it certainly mirrors the fact that the only still life that we have that's realistic is one that was way earlier. You know, the one, the bathroom door, where you can see the little figure in the background.
More Matisse influenced.
Yes, right, exactly, which is totally a Matisse influence, because he always had that sort of space within the space, and that was done before the Hofmann school. So it's hard to say that all of those charcoal still lifes are in the first year or 2, but I'm guessing that they were. I'm guessing that she started out doing still lifes in charcoal, and then once Hofmann said, okay, you know, you can paint, there are all those wonderful still lifes that are practically just little dabs, you know, little dabs of color. That would be my educated guess, but we can't say for 100% sure, and it certainly does not appear, at least to me, that any of these charcoal still lifes are studies for a subsequent painting. They're not.
Yeah, that seems to be the case, that there's nothing that relates directly to, except for the mural studies, which clearly are studies for another painting that was never executed.
Exactly. But
there's a question here from Kohei Kurihara, who asks, where do you think Krasner gets her energy in art?
Well, she had a lot of that sort of anger and arrogance had something to do with, wanting to overcome her family's non-interest in her as becoming an artist. And I don't know, I'm going to say she was born that way.
Well, I remember Al Lerner telling me,
Yeah.
he was the first director of the Hirshhorn Museum, and he was on the WPA with her, and she was K and he was L, so they were on the paymasters line together. And he said he described her as a live wire.
Yep.
That was just her
Well,
personality.
yep. I mean, that's sort of who she was. Give me 1 second, because I had this great quote that I put in the catalog by John Little, who was her very, very close friend. Okay. And they met in the Hofmann School, and they were friends for life. He said, "At once I was attracted by Lee, not only by her personality and natural beauty, but by a real dedication to her work, by a quiet, smoldering inner rage that seemed to come through in her drawings, and by beautiful bright green stockings, all of which gave her a marked distinction and set her apart from the student body. Yes, she had style." I think that's a great quote. And there is a kind of smoldering inner rage. I think that that was part of the impetus for her. She may have tamped that down a bit after she married Pollock, because she was really completely convinced that he was the best, around, and she sort of, for a number of years, put her own work second, but eventually it came right back.
Now I have a question from Brian Craig. He is one of our docents and very knowledgeable. He says, "Helen will confirm my obsession with Pollock's stenographic figure.
Yeah.
Several of the works you've shown us seem to be in dialogue before or after with Pollock. Do you see this in other works?" And he says, one slide that tripped this for me was, I think, slide number 9, which
Find that one.
number 9 would have been it was one of the drawings. Yeah.
No, I can look at it on my little cheat sheet.
Uh-huh.
Well, no, number 9 actually is that very early example that I was actually doing research on Hans Hofmann for an exhibition at Berkeley a few years ago at the BAMFA, Berkeley's museum, and I'm going through there, and all of a sudden, there's a section of Hofmann's photographs, okay, which turn out to be photographs of student work. And this was 100% hers, because she wrote on the back of it, and the correct spelling of her name, Lee Krasner. I'm not sure that.
Well, that was from before she knew Pollock, so there's no way he could.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure that there would be any way that this work could be in dialogue with that. And my feeling about stenographic figure is that there's a whole lot of Miro in there.
Mm.
That there's a whole, and I don't think Miro was never really the great influence on Krasner that he was on Pollock in the early 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting idea, but this work is way too early.
Mm-hmm. They didn't meet until 1941, and
right.
So she was still associated with Hofmann, and of course Hofmann was living right next door to Pollock.
Exactly.
So there was a lot of interaction there, but this was way too late for him to have influenced the drawings that she did in Hofmann's school.
Right. And interestingly enough, and Helen knows this, but maybe some of the other ones that are watching, Hofmann was constantly asked whether Pollock was his student. Okay. And in some early things that were written, Pollock was actually incorrectly identified as having been a Hofmann student. And Hofmann's answer, as kind of confirmed by Fritz Bultmann, who thought it was quite amusing, was no, but he was a student of my student, Lee Krasner. So so that kind of sets up, and also interestingly, and we're diverging a drop onto Pollock. I think that his relationship with Hofmann is typically characterized as adversarial, but it really wasn't. I mean, you know, Krasner told that story about, you know, the first time Hofmann met Pollock, he said, you're very talented, you should join my class, you know, but you don't work from nature, so you're going to repeat yourself. And Krasner claims that he said, I am nature, and that's become, you know, like one of the tropes of abstract expressionism. Some other people who were present at that time said that's not exactly how he worded it. He said, I work from myself. But in any case, that has kind of set up their relationship as adversarial, but it was not. There's a lot of proof that it was not, including a wonderful note that Hofmann wrote to Pollock after his second show at Art of the Century, 1945. Saying, Jackson, your work is deliriously beautiful. And also the fact that Krasner and Pollock were responsible for tricking Peggy Guggenheim into going next door to see Hofmann's work and giving him his first show when he was in his 60s. So that's a little bit of a, you know, it's part of the myth, but it isn't exactly.
You know, you remarked in passing that if Hofmann, you put the Hofmann drawing next to the Krasner drawing and said that they possibly were drawing at the same time from the same model, but that he wouldn't show his students what he was doing. I think that's very interesting, that here is a teacher whose students never saw his work. Well, some did. I mean, he shared a studio with Mercedes Matter in Provincetown. I think that there was a group of women, which included Lillian O'Lindsay, who subsequently Kiesler, blah, blah. There was a group of and Bultmann. There was a group of favorites or whatever you would, however, you know, like a little cadre of, who did. But no, otherwise he totally, Lee Krasner claims that until she and Pollock went next door with Peggy Guggenheim in 1944, she had never seen any painting or drawing by Hofmann, and I believe her. Well, he never exhibited. I mean, that's the thing. He was teaching, but he wasn't showing. Exactly, and he had the notion that he didn't want his students to copy him, and so forth. But I mean, you know, there's no question that Mercedes Matter had, you know, complete access to. Well, in other respects as well, but yeah, right, exactly. Because they were basically living together, you know. But Krasner says she wasn't, and I believe that. Joan, did you have a comment?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. You know, I have told you before how much I was completely astonished, blown away, excited about that group of collage paintings, imperfect, perfect, whatever. I mean, they were enormous. But I'm now thinking about them in relationship to the collages that she was doing before that. Ones where she was sometimes taking a portion of that, sometimes taking something from Jackson's work and incorporating it. And I'm wondering about this transition, because this is so much more a bold, determined, imperative, as you might say, statement. How do you think that she got from works that were, for the most part, smaller, but not so deliberately using those sketches that came from the Hofmann class that could be very easily identified? Well, and the imperfect, perfect, you know.
Yeah. And actually, I think that that series is called 11 Ways to Use the Words to See, and I'm pretty sure that it was I think it was Sol Steinberg that defined them as these different time issues. There are photographs of her, and I probably should have included one in here. I thought about it too late. There are photographs, lots of photographs of her that were taken by Ray Eames of her cutting and splicing these. I mean, she is very deliberately doing that. In other words, she's at a table and she's cutting them, and she knows exactly what she's doing. How do I think she got there?
Well, from the collages, which are much, the earlier collages, which are much
Yeah.
more like collages,
Well, and there's actually kind of a 20-year gap there, because the works that were shown at Pace were done in 1976.
This was a moment of I don't know what I would call it. It's like it's a triumphant moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to do a whole show. I mean, they were fabulous to see together.
Yeah.
To see all of these works assembled like that.
Yeah. There was a whole room of them in at the Barbican in the recent exhibition. I mean, they're stunning. There was one at the Kasmin booth, and I believe, and I think that there's only one other one left. And they did sell the one that they took to Switzerland, and I did hear that was coming back to the United States, whereas all the other works that they sold to Europeans. So they're going to disperse into European collections. I don't know, it's hard to say. It's kind of like almost like the phoenix rising from the ashes, which is not to say that her works in between were not also interesting and important, but I guess after Brian Robertson found these works, she looked at them and she said, whoa, I can do something with that.
I can do something with this, yeah.
And actually, interestingly, although it's not quite as exciting, Mercedes Matter's last works, which are these enormous charcoal still lifes, also went back to the Hofmann school. In other words, this was charcoal on these huge canvases. It's really interesting to me that these two women had this late flowering that actually kind of harks back to their earliest experiences. In Krasner's case, ones that she totally rejected. She was absolutely appalled by what she's, by him drawing on her things and by him cutting in. He actually cut students' things, and there are pictures of what do you call it? I'm trying to think of where it was. Well, in any case, in that Hofmann book, I'm her name. I'm having a senior moment.
Cynthia Goodman show?
No, the Canadian woman.
Yeah, I haven't got it either.
In any case, she actually found pictures of I guess it must have been another student things of things where the thing is cut off and you can see it like taped on time, and a lot of students really thought it was very exciting to see him do this, and some of them were like, what? I mean, can you imagine a teacher in an art school today doing something like that? Not even a little bit. Just taking a scissors and going and then lifting that part and attaching it. Tina Dickey's book. I don't think that there's any particular event in Krasner's life in the 1970s that you could say precipitated this, except for the fact that she said, "Whoa, I forgot I did these." These are pretty
Brian
cool.
Robertson brought them back to her attention.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of Brian, we have another question from Brian Craig. He says, despite the quote that you shared about this being done by a woman, he's so good you wouldn't know it was done by a woman. It seems from photos that women were relatively welcomed by Hofmann. Would you address that, please?
Oh, yes. The women in his class are the ones that paid full boat, and that's how he kept afloat. Literally. I mean, yes, he had many women students, and this one, I mean, Helen Frankenthaler even studied with him for a brief period. Joan Mitchell tried, but said she couldn't understand a word he was saying because his accent was so thick. But yeah, the school had a great many women, and some of them went on to greater glory, and others were there and learned things and so on. But he didn't really make any bones about the fact that he accepted all of these women because he needed their tuition.
Mm.
So that's that's sort of the deal.
Well, the practical side of it, certainly, yeah. And when I was
Exactly.
at the Brooklyn Museum Art School, I think it was the same way, that you paid your tuition. Well, I was a scholarship student, but the women, the community people, and particularly the women, were the ones who were paying the bills.
Yeah, kept the lights on and so forth. But there are many women who consider him extraordinarily important to their career. I mean, Krasner didn't, but then the way in which she worked sort of belied that that situation. But what I hope that I got across in the essay is that she was able to do something else with those things that she learned. I mean, Hofmann was doing that to show people how to fix a picture, and she was able to use those, cutting and pasting and kind of diagrammatic design, whatever. She was able to use that to make incredible, works that really wasn't the way Hofmann was doing it. Hofmann was doing it as a teacher. And she was able to take those things that she thought were really awful when she was young and make them great. Mentioned in my biography were these two exhibitions that I did for Hollis Taggart of Michael West. Michael West only studied with Hofmann for 6 months, and she left because she said she thought it was too much like a cult.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm.
but yet throughout her career, she constantly went back to the things that she learned from Hofmann in those 6 months. And in her notes, and she left a lot of notes on art, thousands of pages actually of notes on art. She doesn't make any bones about it. I mean, she admits that that Hofmann was sort of sitting on her shoulder, for the rest of her career. Of course, he was extremely important to Mercedes Matter, who then opened her own school, the studio school, which is still in existence, that to teach in the same atelier kind of style that Hofmann. And there are quite a few. I mean, Ray Eames, who was she wasn't married to Charles Eames yet. I mean, he was important to her in design. So even though he may not have necessarily, and oh yes, then there's always the other most famous quote is, I'm pretty sure it's Nevelson. Louise Nevelson may or may not have studied with him in his Munich school, but Louise Nevelson remembers going to a dinner where Hofmann gave the toast, and the toast was, "To art, only the men have wings." So I mean, this was kind of the thing. But I don't know that deep down he actually felt that way, because in a lot of his letters, I think he really shows that he has a great deal of faith and trust and appreciation for many of the women artists who studied with him.
Now, here's a question from Mary Nettie Rodriguez. She says, is there any evidence that I think she means Clement Greenberg, held any sway over the trajectory of Krasner's work?
More in a negative way. Canceling an important exhibition that he was supposed to give her at French and Company. When he saw the newer work that she was doing, he said, "Nah, I don't like those." Then the show was canceled. Of course, his support for Pollock was very important to them, them as a couple or whatever. I don't think that Krasner thought very much of the idea of Helen Frankenthaler and Clement Greenberg being a couple, and Greenberg giving Helen Frankenthaler all kinds of opportunities that she would not otherwise have had, including dinners with Krasner and Pollock, and watching Pollock paint and so on. Greenberg, Krasner introduced Greenberg to Pollock, because Krasner was introduced to Greenberg at a party at Harold Rosenberg's. I mean, I'm throwing out these names, and some of you may have absolutely no idea who these people are, but they were important critics. So he certainly had impact on her life, whether it was impact on her career or on her painting. I think probably less so.
Well, supposedly he said that when he saw the Collage show at the Stable Gallery in 1955,
Yeah,
and he actually repeated this when he came to the Pollock House to give his talk, he said that he felt that she had moved ahead of Jackson.
yeah,
But he didn't tell her that at the time.
right.
And that was the problem, that he didn't encourage her the way he had encouraged Pollock and encouraged other artists,
Yeah,
whether or not he was influential in like suggesting that she might move in a certain direction the way he did with other artists. I don't think that happened at all. But the fact that he had this positive response and didn't share it with her always
Yep.
seemed to me to be really mean in a way.
yeah, I agree with you. But I had correspondence with him at the time that I was writing the Pollock book, and he absolutely wrote. I mean, I asked him for an interview, and he wouldn't give me an interview, but he answered some questions, and of course it wasn't email in those days. He wrote me like 2 letters, and in one he said that she had the best eye in New York for the art of painting. In other words, there's no question that he felt that she understood Picasso and Matisse and blah blah blah, and he said that she was the most. He said that she was the most important influence on Pollock.
Mm.
So I guess, I mean, yeah, maybe they were both sort of abrasive personalities. So maybe, maybe that was not destined for them to be able to sort of talk to each other. But I mean, I think those are 2 pretty important statements, that she had the best eye in New York for the art of painting, and that she was the most important influence on Pollock. I mean, those are pretty
Definitive statements. Yeah.
And part of that influence was clearly that she understood what he was doing and had him keep going at it.
Mm.
Whereas somebody else might have looked at it and said, "What is that? That's garbage. Let's throw that out." Something, some kind of thing.
Also, didn't Greenberg attend some Hofmann classes?
Yes, Hofmann was very important to Greenberg. There's no question that Hofmann and Hofmann was he gave a series of lectures.
At the New School, was it, or somewhere like that?
He gave a series of lectures, and I have to say that I'm not sure that I 100% believe this, because I'm not sure that the chronology is right. But Lillian Kiesler told me that a whole group of students got together and asked him to give lectures that people, the public, could come and would have to pay for. Okay, because the reason why they wanted to do that is that they wanted to raise money to buy a layette for the baby that Virginia Admiral and Robert De Niro Sr. were having, and of course the baby is
Robert De Niro.
Robert De Niro, that we all know. She told me that, and I kind of like, but I'm not quite sure that it fits with Robert De Niro's birthday, but it's a great story. And Robert De Niro Sr. was in that picture that I showed in the beginning of of Hofmann teaching. He was definitely a Hofmann student.
Well, do we have any other questions or comments? If not, I just want to thank you so much, Ellen. It's always astonishing when new work comes to light. And even though it fits so perfectly well within the known
Mm-hmm.
it just expands our understanding so much, and just gives us that much more hope that more will come to light. And
You never know.
you never know what's going to turn up.
You never know. Well, thank you all for being such a good, attentive audience and great questions.
And thank you so much, Claire, for being our co-host, and to Stony Brook University Libraries for helping us with this series. And I want to invite you all to come back on the 19th, which is 2 weeks from today, when we will have Deborah Bricker-Balkin speaking about her new and long-awaited biography of Harold Rosenberg. So it will be Harold Rosenberg, A Critic's Life, October 19th at 6. Please join us for that, and we'll hope to see you all then. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Most of the people who left.